My name is Dima, and before you click away, before you decide you already know what kind of person I am, I want you to stay. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't the story you've been told. It's not the story the news wanted to sell you. It's not the clean little tragedy where the monster came from nowhere and the saints were slaughtered. It's messier than that. Everything is messier than that. I was born in Ukraine. I don't romanticize it. I know some people do. The architecture, the culture, the people. Maybe that's a beautiful country if you arrive with a passport and a return ticket. But when you're a child and your mother dies when you're 8 years old, and the only thing left of your family is a man who smells like vodka at 8 in the morning, it stops being beautiful very fast. My father didn't disappear slowly. He disappeared all at once. One day he was a person, then my mother was gone, and he became a ghost that walked around and sometimes knocked things over and sometimes knocked me over too. Not because he hated me. That's the thing people don't understand. It would have been easier if he hated me. He just didn't care. I was a problem he hadn't solved and couldn't return. So he returned me somewhere else. The orphanage. I was 8 years old, and he walked me to the gate and handed me a plastic bag with 2 shirts and some socks and left without looking back. I watched him walk away. I did not cry. I want you to remember that. I did not cry. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because at 8 years old, in the world I came from, crying was a luxury you quickly learned you couldn't afford. Tears cost more than they gave you back. That was one of the first real lessons I ever learned, and I never forgot it. The orphanage was nothing like what you might imagine. There was no warmth behind the stone walls. No underpaid hero with kind eyes and a belief in the potential of broken children. There was a building that smelled like boiled cabbage and bleach and something else. Something underneath both of those smells that I didn't have a word for at 8, but I have a word for now. Despair. The kind of despair that isn't dramatic. The kind that is quiet and institutional and simply there, the way furniture is there, the way walls are there. The despair of a system that has categorized you as a problem and has no genuine interest in solving you. The men who ran that place. I will not call them caretakers because they cared for nothing, operated by simple principles. Rules existed. When rules were broken, the response was physical. No forms to fill out. No appeals. No meetings where adults sat in circles and talked about feelings and root causes. Just pain, fast and clean and efficient. And then you got back up and you remembered the lesson. I was a fast learner. You had to be. The lesson I learned deepest, the one carved into my body before I even had the language to name it, was this: weakness is an invitation. Softness is a target. The only safety available to a person like me was to become too dangerous to bother with, or too invisible to notice. I chose dangerous. Some of the other kids chose invisible. I don't know what happened to them. I stopped paying attention because paying attention to the wrong things costs you in a place like that. 6 years I lived like that. 6 years of concrete and cabbage smell and learning to sleep light and always knowing where the exits were. By 14, I had bruises on my arms and my ribs in places you couldn't see. By 14, I had stopped expecting rescue. I had stopped expecting anything at all. And then the Americans came. They arrived in summer. Robbie and Jennifer Tower. They were tall, both of them, in that particular way Americans are tall. Not just physically, but in their whole presence, like they were used to rooms making space for them. They were clean clothes. They smelled like something I had never smelled before and couldn't identify. Later, I learned it was fabric softener, the smell of a house where someone does the laundry properly. They were Christian missionaries. That's what they said. On a mission. I didn't believe in God then, and I don't believe much in anything now, but I understood missions. I understood people who arrived somewhere with a purpose, did the thing, and then left when it was done. I didn't think I was the purpose. Why would I? I was 14, which in the world of international adoption is already past the point of being considered salvageable by most people. You want babies, toddlers, something small enough that the damage hasn't fully set in yet. Something you can shape. Not a 14-year-old boy with bruised ribs and eyes that have already learned to evaluate every adult in the room for threat level. But Jennifer looked at me, not past me, at me, directly at me, the way almost no adult had in 6 years. She looked at the bruises on my forearms. She looked at the way I held myself, braced, slightly forward, always half ready for impact. She said something to Robbie in English, and he nodded, and his jaw went tight, and I read that tightness the way I read everything, as danger. It wasn't danger. I know that now. They came back the next day, and the day after. They asked questions through a translator. My name, my age, what I liked, what I wanted to be when I grew up. That last question, I didn't answer. I had no answer. I had never once in 6 years allowed myself to construct a future in my mind because hope was the most expensive thing in the world, and I couldn't afford the crash when it didn't come true. On the third day, Jennifer brought chocolate, not as a bribe. I want to be honest about that. There was no transaction in her eyes when she put it on the table. She said something soft in English, and the translator said, "She brought this for you. You don't have to take it if you don't want to." I took it, and I watched myself take it from a distance, curious, like watching an animal do something that surprised even itself. The paperwork took 1.5 years. I didn't fully track the time. Time moved differently for me then, more like weather than like something countable. But they kept coming back. They wrote letters. They sent photographs. One photograph was a room, blue walls, a wooden desk, a window with a tree visible outside. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself not to feel anything about it. I told myself to stay hard and stay ready the way I had always stayed. But something happened anyway. Something small and stupid, and probably the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to me. I started to hope. In 2016, I boarded a plane for the first time in my life and arrived in the United States of America. I want to tell you what that was like because I don't think people understand what it is to arrive somewhere utterly foreign when you have been nowhere. When your entire world, every map you've ever held in your head, is one building, one street, one gray corner of one post-Soviet city, and then suddenly you are in an airport the size of a small town, and everyone is speaking a language that sounds like static, and the lights are too bright, and everything smells different, and you have nowhere to put any of it. I was scanning for threats the entire time. Old habit. The house was real. The blue room was real. The desk and the tree outside the window were all exactly as they were in the photograph. Robbie showed me around the house slowly, pointing at things, naming them in English, bed, closet, desk, and watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Not pity, something more careful than pity. Something that didn't have a category in the library of expressions I'd spent 6 years building. Jennifer cooked dinner for that first night. She put a plate in front of me, and I ate everything on it fast and completely, and then I looked up from the empty plate, and she had a look on her face that I understand now was grief. Because she could see from the way I ate, from the speed and the totality of it, from the way I kept my arm curved around the plate, even though no one was going to take it. She could see what I had come from, and she cried later, quietly, in another room. I heard her, a woman crying because I had eaten too quickly, because my hunger made her sad, because I mattered to her somehow. I couldn't map it. I didn't know what to do with it. I filed it under things that might be a trap. School was its own war. Academically, I was fine. I was smart, always had been. Studying had been one of the only places in the orphanage where I could lose myself and feel something close to functional. But socially, the other kids were a different species. Their problems made no sense to me. Their dramas, who said what online, what someone wore, whether they got into the right college. They came from a world I didn't speak. They had been allowed to be soft their whole lives. And when someone got in my face, and someone always eventually gets in your face, I went somewhere very cold and very quiet inside myself. And then I responded with everything I had. Because that's what you do when you've been shaped by a place that rewards totality. You don't do proportionate. You don't de-escalate. You eliminate the threat. Completely. Robbie and Jennifer were called to the school. Then called again. And again. And they would come home and sit with me at the kitchen table and try to talk. The talking. The American talking. They believed, and I'm not mocking them. I'm genuinely not, because they believed it with their whole hearts, that talking could fix anything. That if you found the right words and the right tone and sat in the right chairs and used the right therapeutic language, the damage could be unpacked and sorted and healed. I sat at the kitchen table and I gave them the answers that ended the conversations fastest. I wasn't lying exactly. I was optimizing. Give the person across from you the thing they need to hear and they will leave you alone. I've been doing that for years. It is a skill. They thought things were getting better. They were not getting better. Inside me, something was winding tighter by the month. Something that had no name and no clear target, but was always present. A coil of wire in my chest. Always taut, always vibrating. I know now what it was. I've had years to read about it, to understand it in the sterile language of psychology, complex PTSD, reactive attachment disorder, a nervous system calibrated for danger that genuinely cannot process safety without reading it as threat. The kindness felt wrong because it was unfamiliar. The warmth felt like a trick. The love felt like a debt I would eventually have to pay. But that is what I understand now. What I felt then, in that house, at that kitchen table, In my blue room with the tree outside the window, what I felt was rage. Pure, sourceless structural rage. Here is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part people skip. Robbie and Jennifer Tower were good people. I've said that to detectives, I've said it in court, and I'm saying it to you now. They were good people. Sincere, faithful, loving, generous people who genuinely believed they could save a boy they found covered in bruises in a Ukrainian orphanage. And they had rules. Normal rules. Fair rules. Be home by this time. Help around the house. Do your homework. Be responsible. Get a job. Become independent. Rules every parent gives every child in the history of normal families. The problem is that I was not from a normal family. I was from a place where rules came with fists, where the person with authority over you had absolute power over your body and your safety, where the only relationship between rules and enforcement was pain. My nervous system had been wired to that equation for 6 years during the most critical developmental window of my life. You cannot rewire that at a kitchen table, no matter how patiently you sit there. When Jennifer told me what time to be home, my body did not hear, "I love you and I want you safe." My body heard, "I have power over you." When they asked me to look for a job, this was later after everything, after they had taken me back in and bought me a car and given me a bank card and offered me a second chance. When they said, "Dima, you should try to find work, try to be more independent," I heard, "You owe us. You have always owed us. Now prove it." I know that is not what they meant. I know with total certainty that they were trying to do the right thing. That asking your adult son to build some independence is not a cruelty. That it came from love. But knowing a thing is not the same as feeling a thing. What I felt was a cage. Jennifer was what I called the mayor of the house. She ran things. She made the rules. She was the one who held the line when Robbie wanted to let things go. She was consistent. She was firm. And every time she was firm, my body got the old signal. Danger, threat, authority, prepare to defend, and the wire in my chest wound tighter. I hated her for it. And I hated that I hated her for it, because somewhere in the functional part of my brain, I knew she wasn't wrong. I knew she was doing what a mother does. But knowing and feeling are not the same, and the feeling always won. In 2018, I pushed her during an argument. It wasn't planned. We were fighting about something I cannot even reconstruct now. Something small, something that wouldn't register as a real conflict to a normal person. And the wire snapped and something came out of me outward, and she fell and broke her back in her arms. I stood in the kitchen and looked at what I had done. Robbie called the police, his voice very controlled, the way men get when the horror hasn't fully arrived yet. Jennifer was on the floor. I didn't run. I stood there looking. That moment is the clearest thing I have from all of those years. I can still see it perfectly. Jennifer on the floor, Robbie on the phone, the kitchen bright and ordinary, the smell of whatever she'd been making for dinner before everything went sideways. And I felt nothing. Or, that's not accurate. I felt something. The thing that lives underneath rage once the rage has fully discharged. A hollowness, a silence, the wire unclenched. That silence scared me more than anything else. They forgave me. Robbie and Jennifer Tower, followers of a God who told them 70 times 7, they forgave me. Jennifer healed, slowly, through surgery and physical therapy, she healed. And then they prayed about it, talked about it, and they decided another chance, because that is what their faith required, and that is who they were. They brought me back into the house, and they were even kinder than before. More attentive, more generous. A car, a bank card, practically everything I asked for, given without hesitation, as if enough love applied consistently could eventually dissolve what 6 years of a Ukrainian orphanage had built into my cells. The kindness made me angrier. I need you to understand this, because it is the part that makes people decide I am simply a monster and stop thinking. The anger wasn't ingratitude, or it wasn't only ingratitude. It was something more knotted and more desperate than that. When they gave me things, what came with the things, invisibly, not in any way they intended, was obligation. A debt with no amount and no due date and no terms, just a permanent pressure, a permanent sense that I owed them something I could never calculate or repay. The love was the cage. The generosity was the lock. I know how that sounds. I know how it sounds to someone who grew up in a house where love was just love, where your parents bought you things because they loved you, and that was it, clean and complete. I know I sound like a sociopath, constructing justifications for the unjustifiable. Maybe I am, but I'm also a person trying to honestly describe what was happening inside my head. And this is what was happening. The more they gave, the more trapped I felt. The more they tried to connect, the more the wire wound. The more they loved me, the angrier I became. Not because I wanted to be, but because love was a language my nervous system didn't have the hardware to receive. And then they asked me to find a job, and something crystallized. I sat with that crystallization for days, for weeks. I drove around in the car they had bought me, on roads paid for by the bank card they had given me, and I ruminated. I turned the anger over and over. I thought about going back to Ukraine, starting over, somewhere clean, somewhere without debts and obligations and expectations, and someone else's definitions of what I was supposed to become. I formed a plan. I'm not going to romanticize it. There was nothing grand about it. I was a damaged 22-year-old who had been angry for his entire conscious life and had finally found a target that made sense to him. I made a plan. Leave. Go back to Ukraine. But first, make sure the problem was finished. I waited for the right night. August 31st, 2023. I drove around for a while. I drank in the car. I told myself things I won't reconstruct here because they don't deserve to be reconstructed. The logic of a person who has talked himself into something irreversible is not wisdom. It's just the sound of a door closing. I waited until the lights in the house went off. Then I went inside. I took a knife from the kitchen. Then I went to their bedroom door. I've been asked many times what I was thinking in those moments. The honest answer is nothing. Not numbness, not blankness, not dissociation. Nothing. In moments of total action, there's no thinking. There's only the thing being done. The thinking happens before or after. During, there's only forward. Robbie was asleep. I went for him first because I was afraid of him. And let me say that out loud because I think it matters. I was afraid of my father. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, and I knew if I gave him the advantage of consciousness and full strength, I would lose. So I went for him in the dark while he slept. He woke up. Of course he woke up. He fought, wounded, bleeding, barely understanding what was happening. He fought because that is what Robbie Tower was. A man who would fight for his life, even when the person taking it was someone he loved. We went through the room and into the hall. Jennifer came out of the bed. She tried to help him, tried to stop me, and I turned on her too. Robbie made it to the living room. He went down and did not get up. Jennifer ran, outside, into the night, covered in blood, to the neighbor's door, knocking, screaming, "Help me! Please, someone help me!" The neighbor heard. The neighbor was afraid and did not open the door, and I will carry that image. Jennifer at a door that wouldn't open, as long as I live. I found her there. I told her to come back inside. She asked me to call an ambulance. I did not call an ambulance. She came back inside. I finished what I had started. In the interrogation room, the detective asked me about that moment, about her asking for the ambulance. And I couldn't explain why I didn't call. I couldn't explain it then, and I can't explain it now in any way that makes human sense. I was committed. I had crossed a line past which logic that resembles what you know as logic no longer applies. You go all the way or you are always going to lose, and losing was the thing I'd been taught since I was 8 years old to prevent at any cost. Robbie Tower, 68 wounds. Jennifer Tower, 79. I know the numbers. I have always known the numbers. Then I got in the car and drove toward a plan that was already falling apart. They found me the next morning at a gas station. I was still wearing the clothes. The detective was professional, patient. He asked questions carefully, trying to build a picture, trying to find a way into my logic. I answered him without particular effort, because the plan was gone. The door I'd been moving toward had simply closed, and there was nothing left but the room and the lights and the questions. He asked, "What were you thinking when you went in there?" I told him, "Nothing. I was thinking nothing." He didn't believe me. People never believe that answer, because they assume the interior of every human head resembles their own. Narrating, processing, full of real-time emotional commentary. That is not how mine has ever worked. That is not how it was built. He asked, "Was there a struggle?" Yes. He asked, "Did she say anything?" She asked me to call an ambulance. He asked, "Do you feel remorse?" I told him it was complicated. He told me that wasn't an answer. He was right. But complicated was the only word I had that was also true. Robbie's father spoke at sentencing. He said, "Robbie was my son. He was my son. He would never have been a better father." He said, "You didn't just kill Robbie and Jen. You killed all of us." He looked at me when he said it. I looked back. I've been told that my expression in that courtroom was disturbing, that I showed no appropriate effect, that I looked like someone watching something that had nothing to do with him. I'm not going to tell you that impression was wrong, but I heard him. I heard all of it. Every family member who stood up and described who Robbie and Jennifer were. The words that kept coming: generous, faithful, joyful, loving, honest. I heard the children who didn't understand where Robbie had gone. I heard Robbie's father say his son had done everything possible to make me happy. I heard him say it wasn't enough. He was right about that too. They asked me at one point in the proceedings whether my parents had been good to me, whether they had hurt me, and I said what I have always said because it is true and it is the most useless truth in the world. It's complicated. The prosecutor asked me in the most controlled, precise voice, "You went into that bedroom and you took a knife and you struck your father in the dark while he was sleeping, and you want this jury to believe you were thinking nothing. Is that what you're telling them?" And I said, "It's too complicated for you." Not because I wanted to be cruel, because I genuinely believed and still believe that the inside of what I am is not something that translates. Not into English, not into courtroom language, not into anything designed for people who grew up in houses where the laundry smelled like fabric softener and someone called your name at dinner. The judge sentenced me to life without the possibility of parole. I was 22 years old. I'm telling you this because the story exists now. It is on YouTube and podcasts and crime forums and thousands of comment sections. And in almost every version, I am one of two things: a monster or a victim, pure evil or a broken child who never had a chance. I'm not going to stand here and pick one of those for you. What I will tell you is this: there are children right now who are 8 years old, standing at gates, watching someone walk away without turning around. Most of them will not become me. Most of them will find, through luck, through some intervention I did not have, through some resilience that does not depend on circumstances, a way to receive love without treating it as a threat. A way to accept rules without feeling them as blows. A way to build a future rather than just surviving each day like a problem to get through. I was not one of those children. I don't know exactly why. I don't think there's a clean answer. I think damage accretes differently in different people, and sometimes the accrual reaches a mass that nothing available can counteract. And I think I was one of those cases, and I think Robbie and Jennifer Tower had no real way of knowing that when they walked into an orphanage in Ukraine with good hearts, and a Christian mission, and a photograph of a blue room. They were not equipped for what I was. That is not blame. That is just fact. They gave me the only version of love they knew how to give, and it was real love. And I'm not going to sit here and call it fake or insufficient or conditional. It was real. The blue room was real. The tree outside the window was real. The fabric softener and the cooked dinners and the kitchen table conversations and the second chance and the car, all of it was real. I just cannot receive any of it. I don't know what that makes me. I have sat with that question for years in a cell that has no window, and I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure a clean answer exists. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm not asking for your understanding. I'm not sure I deserve either. But I wanted you to hear it in my voice, not in the voice of a documentary narrator or a detective recounting evidence or a prosecutor describing what the state of the house looked like when they arrived. In my voice, because I was a real person before I was a case number. And Robbie and Jennifer were real people before they were a crime scene. And the distance between who we were and how this ended is not a simple distance. It is a distance made of years and countries, and a concrete building, and a plastic bag with 2 shirts, and a man who walked away from a gate without looking back. I look back. I always look back. That might be the truest thing I've ever said. Robbie Tower was 38 years old. Jennifer Tower was 47 years old. Dima Tower was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is a fictional first-person script inspired by documented public events. It does not claim to represent the actual thoughts or statements of Dima Tower beyond what was recorded in public court proceedings and police interrogation transcripts. It is written as a dramatic monologue for storytelling and journalistic reflection purposes only. Subscribe for more.